Hey, this is Elijah from the Breakdance team, and today I'm going to show you how to use many of the awesome features in Breakdance's native code editor to build a recent sales pop-up like you've no doubt seen on a ton of e-commerce sites. And we'll be doing it all from scratch using HTML and JavaScript. No plugins or add-ons required. Let's get started. I've got my landing page from the Breakdance design library, and I want to add a pop-up notification to the bottom left corner to let visitors know who recently bought and what they purchased. Let's go ahead and drop in a code block and get to work writing some code. First, I'll open up the PHP and HTML editor to expand it out. To build the structure of this pop-up, I'm going to use emmet, which is a shorthand syntax for code that lets you scaffold out your HTML a lot faster. Emmet abbreviations let you use CSS-like syntax to specify HTML structures, then expand it out into actual code with a keystroke. So I'll drop in a div with a class of note-wrapper, then inside that I need a few child elements with their own classes as well. And for all the pop-up details, I'll nest them inside another div so I can lay things out how I want. Once I've got my structure sorted in my emmet abbreviation, I can just hit tab and it instantly creates the real HTML that would have taken me a lot longer to write out by hand. Next, I need some placeholder text in these 3 paragraphs I just created. If I hold Command or Control and click in all 3 paragraphs, I'll get 3 cursors, just like a full-fledged IDE. Now I can type placeholder once and it puts it in all 3 locations. Now let's swap over to CSS and start styling these elements I just created. First, I'll set up the note-wrapper div. I'll give it a fixed position because I want it floating down in the left-hand corner. I'll also set the left and bottom properties to 32 pixels and 120 pixels respectively. Max width should be 100%. A little aside from the future, I forgot to add the 300 pixel width to this element, which messed up the design a little bit, but I ended up adding it later. Finally, let's give it a high Z index so it doesn't hide out under any other elements on the page. Next up is the note itself, which is a link within the now styled wrapper. Later, we'll have multiple notes, but we'll start with one, and then using JavaScript, this one note will be duplicated later. I'll drop the note class into my CSS, give it a white background, and actually, instead of hard coding this, we can use a variable from our design set, since the code editor has selector and variable autocomplete that's totally aware of the Breakdance globals. I'll type var, open and close parentheses, and then inside I'll put 2 dashes, and you can see all of the global colors available. Let's grab the white one. Now I'll set the display property to grid. Let's fix this typo, get rid of the S, so the changes actually apply as we're making them. For the grid template columns property, we'll do 1FR and 3FR, which will give us a sort of narrow left column and a wider right column. And let's drop in 16 pixels padding and 16 pixels gap, as well as a 4 pixel border radius. Since this is a link element, it'll default to underlining all the text inside of it, which we don't want, so let's do text decoration none. Next, I'll set up some styles for the animations that we will use later. But as I'm typing this out, you'll see I'm also getting autocomplete suggestions for the property names, which is super helpful to make sure you're using the right name. Now, I'm just going to continue styling these elements, but I'll switch over to the sidebar code editor, which works the exact same way. It's just a little smaller, but it also gets out of our way so we can see our styling changes as we make them. Now that all of our styles and structure are kind of locked in, we can start to fancy it up with a little bit of JavaScript and some animation. For the logic and animation, we're going to use Alpine, which is a super lightweight library that allows you to add JavaScript reactivity to your elements, and it'll allow us to loop through some JavaScript data to determine how many cards there are and what's in each of them. We can also use Alpine to apply and remove classes on a timer, which gives us the ability to do a nice fade in and fade out animation. So we'll pop out to alpinejs.dev and go to their example and grab the script tag, which is just going to load this from a CDN, but you could load it locally if you wanted to. Now we'll drop the script tag into our PHP and HTML editor. Next, we want to define our data structure, so we'll add an inline script here, and you'll note that my script tag was automatically completed by the code editor, which is another nice feature. Next, we'll add a variable that will hold all the properties we need as well as our notes. It's going to be an object, and the first thing we need to track is which of our notes is active. So we'll add a property called active callout, and we'll just set it to 0. This is going to be the index of which callout is showing up. Then we need a property to tell us how fast to cycle through them. This will just make it easier to change later. So we'll create a property called cycle speed. And for now, we'll just throw a value in here. This is taking a millisecond value, and we may need to adjust it later, but for now, it should be fine. Next, we just need a property to tell us if the animation should be paused or not. Finally, we'll do a callouts array, and in the array, we'll have an object for each note. This will give us things like the image that should be shown, where it should link to, the name that's shown, which product the person bought, and how long ago. Next, we're going to need a function to make sure that we can cycle through our callouts. So after the callouts data, we'll do a function called nextCallout. What this will do is check if the animation should be paused. So we'll say if this dot paused, then we'll return and do nothing. But if it's not paused, we'll do this dot active callout and just increment that by 1. And then we also need to add some logic to make sure it doesn't increment past the number of available callouts. Now we just need to sprinkle some logic into our HTML because that's how Alpine works. Now there's quite a bit that we need to add here, so I'll just run you through it quickly. Basically, we need an x-data attribute on the notification wrapper that tells the element where to get all its data from, and we'll just point it at our JavaScript notification object. Now all the elements within this element will have access to these properties that we created. Next, we need to set the timer that triggers the animation. So on the x-init property, we will do set interval, do a little arrow function here, and then the timing for this interval will be the cycle speed property. And now to repeat this link for the number of notes that there are, we need to wrap it in a template and give the template an x-4 property. And for that property's value, within parentheses, we'll do callout, index, which gives us access to the index of the item in the array, and then in callouts. Now we have access to an item called callout.link.imageURL.name, whatever property we need from the current callout. Now to bind some of these HTML attributes to the data, we just put a colon before them. So for href, we put :href and then callout.link. Now to pull the link from the data rather than us needing to hardcode it. And since this template is being repeated for every note, the data will be mapped to the correct piece of data in our JavaScript. We'll do :class, and here we can do a special notation that allows us to check if the current index equals the active callout, and if it does, we give this element the class of notification -- active. We're going to do kind of the same thing to check if the index isn't the current callout to make sure that this thing is not tabbable when it's hidden. And then we just need some event handlers. So on mouse enter and focus in, we want to pause this, but on mouse leave and blur, we want to unpause it. Now for the image, we'll map the source attribute to the image URL in the callout. And then for each of the paragraph elements where we're going to show the name, detail, and timing, we'll just do x-text, which will insert the data as the text inside the element. And for that property, we'll do callout.name, callout.detail, and callout.timing. Next, we just need to uncomment our animation code, and this thing will start cycling through the data. The only thing we're missing is the images, so we'll pop out to our media library, grab a URL for an image per note, and then we'll drop those into the data. The nice thing about doing it this way is that if we ever wanted to add more data to it, or we even wanted to get data from an external source to show in this way, we could do it since we're using Alpine. All we'd have to do is either hardcode another note within the callouts array, or just make sure that the data is in whatever source we're drawing from. And since our code is getting kind of long here, we can actually take advantage of the folding ability of the Breakdance code editor and just fold these longer structures up. Now there is one thing I want to do here, and I want to change note to notification, but I'm going to need to change it everywhere. Without proper IDE features, that would take a bunch of time, but since Breakdance's code editor is basically like a real IDE right in the visual builder, we can use Command or Control F, and we can search for note. And it'll show us everywhere that we have note, and we can type notification as what we want to change it to. Then we can hit replace all. We also have the option to match case, use regex, or do it by specific word, but let's replace all instances of note with notification here, and then we'll jump over to the CSS and change it as well. Now let's go ahead and save. Hop up to the front end, refresh, and everything's still working perfectly. You can see after about 5 seconds, Jeff Waters is going to cycle out, and if we hover over it, it will not animate anymore. So we actually have a chance to hover over it and it will pause, or if we tab into it, it should pause, but it's not currently working. So let's go take a look at why. Let's go ahead and fold the notification variable, and right here's the issue. I misspelled focus in. That's not the correct event. So if we fix that and then jump back to the front end and we tab into the active card, you'll see it will stop cycling. Same as when we hover over it. But if we tab away, you'll note, first of all, we're actually tabbing to the next element on the page and not the hidden elements, which is why we did the tab index manipulation. And once we're tabbed out, it's going to go ahead and begin cycling. So this is just an example use case for the powerful code editor that's built right into Breakdance. You can build really interesting elements like this that normally you need a separate plugin or to build in something like Element Studio or a third-party IDE. But if it's a simple one-off use case, you can just drop everything into a code block and have access to IDE-like code editing features. It makes writing this kind of code really, really fast. And later, you could decide to turn this into a custom element via Element Studio, where all the code editors also have the same exact features. If you're interested in using this element specifically, I'll have links to the code in the video description so you can just copy and paste everything and be up and running in minutes. Again, this is Elijah from the Breakdance team. Thanks for watching.